What if the most formidable armaments of an era faded into insignificance before an relentless future, destined for a violent conclusion in the face of total destruction? History isn't always documented in clear daylight. Often, its most critical chapters are written in gloom, flames, and terror. They are etched in the grinding of mangled metal and the final pleas of sailors realizing they are heading toward their doom. Tonight, we revisit such a moment at a cramped waterway in the Philippines, beneath a moonless, humid tropical sky. It was here, on the night of October 24, 1944, that an entire epoch of maritime combat would meet a brutal, dramatic end. This is the chronicle of two aging sister ships committed to one last desperate assault. But who were these combatants, and what destiny summoned them from obscurity for their final confrontation? To grasp how their journey concluded, we must first examine the vessels themselves. The Imperial Japanese warships Fuso and Yamashiro were not the streamlined contemporary instruments of war like the American Iowa class, or even their massive relative, the Yamato. They were remnants, specters of a previous age, designed before the First World War began. They were genuine dreadnoughts, created in an era where maritime strength was calculated by the simple, harsh logic of massive cannons and dense plating. Upon their debut, they represented the pride of the Japanese fleet and the burgeoning industrial capacity of their nation. However, their most striking trait gave them a nearly prehistoric appearance. What motivated Japanese engineers to develop such a peculiar and intricate profile? It was a characteristic that would render these vessels both iconic and fatally compromised. The Fuso-class battleships, named for an archaic term for Japan and a specific province, were planned in the early 1910s as part of the ambitious 8-8 Fleet initiative to build a navy that could challenge Western powers. Fuso's construction began on March 11, 1912, at the Kure Naval Arsenal, entering service on November 8, 1915. Her sibling, Yamashiro, followed, with her keel laid on November 20, 1913, at Yokosuka, and commissioning on March 31, 1917. These vessels initially displaced over 30,000 tons, reaching 220 meters in length with a 28.7-meter width. Their weaponry was impressive for that time. 12 14-inch, 356-millimeter cannons housed in 6 dual turrets arranged in a distinctive super-firing layout that provided a massive broadside. Their secondary armament consisted of 16 6-inch guns, protected by belt armor up to 12 inches thick. Driven by Brown Curtis turbines and 24 Miyabara boilers, they could originally reach 23 knots.
Westerners referred to them as pagoda masts. They appeared as a disorganized, almost unstable tower of decks, searchlight platforms, and bridge levels stretching high into the air. This distinctively Japanese architecture reflected a persistent, urgent requirement to modify and upgrade older hulls to stay relevant in a fast-evolving world. These structures were laden with spotting stations and rangefinders, embodying a naval philosophy that prioritized the keen eyesight of crewmen to locate targets and win engagements in decisive, short-range artillery duels. The pagoda mast grew out of the original tripod designs during major 1930s upgrades, where multiple levels were added for anti-aircraft weaponry, lights, and fire control systems. This produced a towering, tiered look, similar to traditional Japanese temples, which led to the nickname. However, by 1944, that philosophy was defunct, made irrelevant by an unseen power. In a modern era of combat, where adversaries could perceive targets in the dark using cold electronic sensors, what hope did even the most observant human eyes have? The two sisters had undergone significant overhauls during the 1930s. Their hulls were extended by roughly 7.6 meters to enhance poise and velocity. Their power plants were swapped for more capable Kanpon turbines, increasing output to 75,000 shaft horsepower and raising their top speed to 24.5 knots. Armor was reinforced in vital sectors, with the primary belt reaching 305 millimeters and deck protection improved against air attacks. Defensive weaponry was bolstered to include 8 127mm dual-purpose cannons and many 25mm guns. Their 12 14-inch guns, set in 6 turrets, 2 at the front, 2 in the middle, and 2 at the rear, still possessed immense power, capable of striking targets 38 kilometers away. On paper, they were still dangerous, yet their weaknesses were inherent to their design. Their armor layout was a collection of fixes from a past epoch, susceptible to long-range plunging fire and modern torpedoes in ways contemporary battleships were not. The central turrets, situated too near the exhausts and engine rooms, created risks of magazine explosions. Their velocity, even following upgrades, maxed out at a sluggish 24 knots, making them too slow to accompany the fast carriers that now anchored the fleet, and too slow to escape a persistent foe. How can a war machine still bristling with massive cannons be viewed as obsolete before it even engages in combat?
During the years between wars, Fuso and Yamashiro fulfilled various duties, from naval drills to providing humanitarian aid after the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake. They were involved in inspections for the 1930 London Naval Treaty, but were mostly held in reserve because of treaty restrictions. When World War II broke out, their seniority meant they were assigned to secondary roles. Consequently, the Japanese Navy kept them away from the front lines for the majority of the conflict. They were the homebound vessels, the veteran ships used for training in the protected waters of the Japanese mainland. The sailors on board worked hard, maintaining the ships and conducting endless exercises, while hearing radio updates of massive carrier engagements happening far away, battles that were determining the fate of the empire without their involvement. Crews of over 1,400 men per ship practiced gunnery and damage control incessantly. However, the vessels saw minimal combat beyond escorting convoys and training voyages. But the Empire's luck was running out, and the defensive perimeter was breaking as the American military machine advanced steadily toward Japan. How much longer could these old warriors stay safe in port while their country faced total ruin? By the middle of 1944, Japan's strategic outlook had worsened significantly. Defeats at Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippine Sea had ruined their carrier forces. The Fuso-class ships, once emblems of strength, were now desperate remnants of a pre-carrier age. Their pagoda masts, though striking, were no match for radar-controlled firing. As Allied forces readied for the Philippine invasion, these relics were summoned for one final task, marking their tragic place in naval history. Imagine betting everything, your navy, your nation, your life, on a single bold strategy born from the wreckage of failure. Would you take that risk? By the fall of 1944, the Japanese Empire's situation was not just failing, it was in a terminal state. The crushing defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which American flyers called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, had obliterated the Imperial Navy's air power. More than 600 Japanese planes were lost in one battle, along with 3 carriers, leaving the fleet's aviation wing paralyzed. The capture of Saipan brought the Japanese home islands within reach of American B-29s, which began firebombing cities like Tokyo. The American war effort was unstoppable, with industrial capacity producing vessels, aircraft, and personnel at a speed Japan could never hope to equal. U.S. yards were launching dozens of carriers, while Japan found it difficult to replace even one. Now General Douglas MacArthur was poised to fulfill his vow to return to the Philippines.
For Japan, this was the final line. Losing the Philippines meant losing the essential oil routes from Southeast Asia, the very fuel for their war machine. It would be a catastrophic hit, leaving the Navy trapped in home ports with dry tanks. What kind of strategy could emerge from such complete desperation? The result was Shogo 1, or Operation Victory 1. It was a plan of massive scale, incredible ambition, and terrifying defects. It was a final gamble involving the entire remaining strength of the Japanese Navy in one final battle, organized by Admiral Soemu Toyoda. The strategy called for a massive pincer move to destroy the American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. A northern unit under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, consisting of the last carriers, mostly without planes or pilots, would serve as a lure to pull Admiral William Halsey's potent Third Fleet away. The Japanese understood the American focus on carriers and used it against them, offering their remaining flat tops to draw Halsey north. The primary strike would come from the formidable Center Force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, featuring the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, which would push through the San Bernardino Strait. However, for a pincer to succeed, two jaws are required. What would constitute the southern jaw of this massive trap? That duty was assigned to the Southern Force, led by the experienced Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura. This group was in many respects a sacrificial unit. Its mission was to slip through the Surigao Strait and strike the landing zones from the south, trapping the Americans in a deadly crossfire with Kurita's group. But his fleet was a diverse mix. The core consisted of the two aging sisters, Fuso and Yamashiro, aided by the heavy cruiser Mogami, and only 4 destroyers, Yamagumo, Michishio, Asagumo, and Shigure. On his flagship, the Yamashiro, Admiral Nishimura was the image of stern resolve. He was a veteran 60-year-old fighter, a product of the traditional samurai ethos, known for his fierce, almost reckless devotion to his task. Born on November 30, 1889 in Akita Prefecture, Nishimura finished the Naval Academy in 1911, placing 21st in his class. He focused on navigation and served on cruisers during World War I. By the 1930s, he was in charge of destroyer and cruiser units, gaining a reputation for bravery during the conflict with China. In the Pacific War, he guided the 4th Destroyer Squadron to success at the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942, using aggressive maneuvers to sink Allied vessels. Promoted to Vice Admiral in 1943, he was handed this command despite its near-certain doom. He understood the chances were heavily against him, but his instructions were clear: proceed and strike. There was no strategy for a fallback.
How does a leader ready his sailors and himself for a task with almost no hope of return? Nishimura's group left Brunei Bay on October 23, 1944, moving through the Sulu Sea toward the Surigao Strait. Fuel was limited. The vessels used a combination of heavy oil and raw crude due to deficits. Crews were informed of the mission's gravity, with an emphasis on Bushido to harden their spirits. Nishimura, a traditionalist, likely thought back on his career achievements from Java Sea to this final move. As the sun went down on October 24, the 7 vessels of the Southern Force entered the strait. The night was pitch black, the air heavy with moisture, and the water was as still as dark glass. On the bridges, observers searched the darkness, which felt threatening. Below, the men worked with quiet, nervous efficiency, preparing guns and ammunition, perhaps wondering if their last meal would be their final one. Some wrote to their families, while others prayed at onboard shrines. Nishimura had commanded radio silence, but it was useless. American subs like the Dart and Dace had been tracking him for hours, alerting the 7th Fleet. His path was known. He knew an enemy was waiting in the gloom. But could anyone have foreseen the technological nightmare prepared for them? A second southern unit under Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, with the cruisers Nachi and Ashigara, was supposed to join them, but arrived behind schedule, adding to the confusion. The flaws of Shogo 1, bad timing, fuel issues, and ignoring U.S. radar, ensured its failure from the beginning, turning a desperate plan into a disaster.
What occurs when one side has the benefit of foresight, turning a chaotic fight into a calculated execution where every action is predicted? While Admiral Nishimura moved into the night, guided by obligation and a small hope, his adversary was waiting with cold, certain preparation. Stationed at the northern end of the strait was the American 7th Fleet Support Force, led by Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf. Oldendorf was the exact opposite of Nishimura. He was a strategist, not a gambler. He didn't rely on spirit, but on massive firepower and a new technology that had transformed sea combat. Born on February 16, 1887 in California, Oldendorf finished the Naval Academy in 1909. He served on battleships in the First World War and rose to lead cruiser units in the Pacific. By 1944, as head of Task Group 77.2, he was recognized for his level-headedness and strategic skill. He had analyzed the data from subs and planes. He knew Nishimura was approaching, what ships he had, and their speed. With this, he set the most thorough naval trap in history.
How do you defeat a warrior's resolve? You do it with math. Oldendorf had a massive fleet. He led 6 older battleships, and in a strange twist of fate, 5 had survived the Pearl Harbor raid, repaired and ready for vengeance. The USS California, Tennessee, Maryland, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania were present, their crews eager for a rematch. The 6th was the USS Mississippi. Along with them were 4 heavy cruisers, Louisville, his flagship, Portland, Minneapolis, and Denver, 4 light cruisers, Columbia, Boise, Phoenix, and HMAS Shropshire, and an incredible 28 destroyers. However, Oldendorf's most powerful asset wasn't a cannon, it was radar. While Nishimura's crew struggled to see, Oldendorf's operators sat in dark rooms, watching the Japanese appear as green dots on screens. SG search radars could see ships 20 miles away, and Mark 8 fire control radar ensured precision in the dark. They could track Nishimura's path with total accuracy. The Japanese, using only their eyes, were essentially blind. What does a fight look like when one side sees everything and the other is blind? With this advantage, Oldendorf positioned his navy with deadly care. He built a layered defense, a gauntlet Nishimura would have to survive. First, in the strait, he placed 39 small, quick PT boats to harass the enemy and confirm their location. These wooden boats with torpedoes and machine guns were fast but vulnerable. Further up, hidden in coves and behind islands, were his destroyer groups, Desron 54 on the east, Desron 24 and 56 on the west. They would be the hammer, firing torpedoes from both sides into the Japanese line. Leaders like Captain Jesse Coward were ready to attack. At the very top, Oldendorf placed his heaviest ships in a single line, closing the exit. This was the anvil. Nishimura would be hit by torpedoes from the sides, and any survivors would be crushed by the main battle line. It was a plan for total destruction. Was there any weakness in this plan? The only risk was coordination with Shima's force, but intel suggested they were apart. Oldendorf's strategy used classic tactics like crossing the T, updated for modern tech. The trap was ready, the bait was taken, and the jaws were closing. On the Louisville, the radar plots grew clearer, and PT boat reports confirmed the Japanese were heading straight into the kill zone. There was no sign they knew what was coming. American sailors stood ready, having waited nearly 3 years since the attack on Pearl Harbor for this moment. In the silent, radar-lit command centers, was there any pity, or just the cold satisfaction of a trap about to spring? This setup showed the change in warfare, where tech beat bravery, leading to the last battleship on battleships fight. In the total darkness, how do you fight an unseen enemy that strikes from the shadows, turning the water into a hell of fire? The first trouble started after 10:30 p.m. for the Japanese destroyers. Lookouts saw small, fast shapes, the PT boats. Their engines buzzed as they fired torpedoes and machine guns. Groups like PT-130 and PT-152 fired 37 torpedoes, though most missed. The Japanese fired back with tracers, lighting up the chaos, but the boats were too fast. Nishimura ignored them as a minor problem and increased speed to 20 knots to stay on schedule. But he had made a major mistake. What was the real goal of this first attack? The PT boats succeeded by making the Japanese show their position and speed, which was radioed back to the main fleet. The trap was now perfectly set. The next 90 minutes were quiet, giving the Japanese a false sense of safety. They had survived the first fight, maybe the Americans were weak. But on the U.S. ships, tension grew as radar tracked the blips getting closer. At 2:40 a.m., the trap closed. From the darkness, U.S. destroyers launched their ambush. How could the Japanese defend against what they couldn't see? Destroyers used radar to fire a wave of death. Desron 54 fired from the east, then Desron 24 from the west. Over 100 torpedoes moved toward the Japanese. On the Yamashiro, lookouts screamed about torpedoes from both sides. Chaos broke out as ships tried to dodge in the narrow strait. At 3:09 a.m., the Yamagumo blew up in a massive fireball, taking almost all 228 men with her. Soon, the Michishio was disabled and blew up, and the Asagumo lost her bow. In minutes, Nishimura's screen was gone. Now the torpedoes went for the battleships. What is it like to know a weapon is coming, but not know from where? On the Fuso, the world ended as torpedoes from the USS Melvin hit her side. The ship flooded quickly, lost power, and tilted. Despite old stories of her breaking in two, research shows she sank whole around 3:40 a.m. The two halves seen by Americans were likely the Fuso and the burning Michishio. Only about 10 of her 1,600 crew survived. Nishimura saw the fires but didn't know how bad it was. He moved forward with Yamashiro, the damaged Mogami, and the Shigure. Fuso's end was a nightmare of fire and drowning men. Why did no one realize the scale of the disaster? The mystery lasted for years until dives in 2001 confirmed she was in one piece. Yamashiro took a hit but kept going, her crew fighting to save her.
When the horizon turns to fire and your fate is decided by an old tactic used with new tech, is there glory or just tragedy? Nishimura was alone. His force was ruined, and Fuso was a wreck. Logic said to retreat, but the samurai code didn't allow it. He sent a final message: "We are proceeding to the target point." With his flagship, the damaged Mogami, and the Shigure, he charged toward the U.S. battleships and his own death. What was he thinking, leading his men into a fight they couldn't win? On the Louisville, Oldendorf watched the radar as the Japanese kept coming. His ships, Pearl Harbor veterans, had waited years for this. At 3:51 a.m., he gave the order. He had crossed the T. Nishimura's ships were the vertical line, able to use only a few guns. Oldendorf's fleet was the horizontal line, able to use all 300-plus heavy guns. It was the last time this would ever happen. The horizon exploded in flame as the U.S. line fired. For the Yamashiro's crew, it looked like the sun rising at night. Massive shells screamed through the dark. Radar meant the Americans didn't need to see. Their computers did the work. The first salvo hit, with West Virginia scoring 9 hits. Yamashiro was buried in steel. Shells destroyed her pagoda mast and killed many, likely including Nishimura. They blew up fuel and ammo inside. U.S. cruisers joined in with thousands of shells, tearing the ship apart. How can a crew survive this? Yet she fought back, firing blindly into the night. Her front guns fired about 10 times, but missed the U.S. battleships. Mogami, also hit, crashed into Shigure's Nachi. Yamashiro was dying like a warrior. For 20 minutes, the attack continued. The proud ship was now a burning wreck. At 4:11 a.m., U.S. destroyers moved in. A final torpedo hit the Yamashiro. She tilted, rolled, and at 4:19 a.m. sank with almost all 1,636 men, including Nishimura. Only a few survived. The battle was over. The Southern force was gone. But what did this victory mean? Surigao Strait was the end of the battleship era. U.S. losses were tiny. It avenged Pearl Harbor, but the larger battle saw Japan lose even more, leading toward the end of the war. Nishimura's charge, though pointless, showed the tragic bravery of a dying empire.